Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me, Kowa, as well. I'm just going to be talking to you a little bit today about my South American birding big year in 2024, what I would call an accidental big year. So basically, my plan was to backpack and travel around South America, exploring, looking for new birds, finding new places, and I had no kind of goal in mind when it comes to numbers. When you think of a big year, you often think of a target, right? So the most birds in a county, the most birds in a country, the most birds you've ever seen in a year. I had no goals like that. The goal was to just travel, find new birds, see new places, and have a good year. So this is New Year 2023. I started in the very south of the continent in Tierra del Fuego and finished the year in the highlands of the Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta. During that time, I traveled up through Chile and Argentina, across down through Argentina, back up through Bolivia, down through Brazil, up all along the coast of Brazil, over to Peru, through Peru, and then back up to Colombia, covering somewhere in the region of, I worked it out the other day, about 30,000 kilometers by bus. God knows how many hours on buses, hitchhiking, very few flights. I tried to stay on land as much as possible. And during that time, I was able to observe a large number of species and digiscope a lot of them. So I'm just going to tell a few little stories from different countries along the route because with just 20, 30 minutes to talk, I can't really get too deep into each species. I'm going to start in Argentina. Now, I'm not going to repeat this because I could say it for every country in South America, but Argentina is exceptionally biodiverse. It takes up almost half the length of the South American continent, and while with a meager 1,000 bird species, it can't quite compete with Peru, Ecuador, or Colombia. From the Mata Atlantica in the northeast with the border of Brazil to the Monte deserts of Salta down through the steppe and Patagonia, it packs in a lot of ecosystems and bird species into the country. So a few different species. I could focus on a lot of birds in Argentina. One bird that I would focus on particularly would be the family of birds, the penguins. I was able to observe 5 different penguin species during my time in Argentina, including southern rockhopper, king, and gentoo. But the bird that I really want to talk about in this section, the Argentina section, is this bird, the hooded grebe. This isn't my photo. This is from Juan Maria Raggio of Aves Argentinas. This is one of South America's most critically endangered species. There are about 250 individuals alive in a very small, rapidly diminishing area of central Argentina. Can everyone hear this okay? It seems I'm getting a lot of feedback. Okay, right. So, a little map. This was a bird that I had kind of already written off for this year because, as I said, I was traveling as a backpacker on a backpacker budget, lots of independent travel. Under those kind of conditions, there are some birds you just realize I won't be able to get this bird. It's going to be too hard to get there, logistically too complicated, too expensive, whatever. This was a bird like that. They breed in really remote basaltic lakes in the highlands of central Argentina. Most of those areas are private ranches. It costs a lot of money to get to them. The ranches charge large fees to visit. And I thought, this bird, I'm not going to be able to see this bird. Until I discovered that there was a small population that would nest every year on these small lakes in the Patagonia National Park. And with a lot of hiking and a bit of wild camping, it will be possible to see the birds. So I was able to hitchhike out to this estancia and start the walk up to the lakes. This was my accommodation for the 3 nights, which actually, believe it or not, was nicer than a lot of places I stayed during the course of the year. My little mountain hut with the precaution puma sign down there. And had to hike up to the Meseta, the high plateau of Lake Buenos Aires, and basically just walk around 20 or 30 of these lakes, checking the lakes for the bird. There's lots of silvery grebes up there, and not many hooded grebes. So every time I got to a lake, I'd scan, see these floating birds, get my hopes up, silvery grebe, again and again. That happened for 2.5 days. I walked up and down the plateau every day, sleeping, until finally, on the final day, I obtained the worst ever digiscoping images with a very good scope, but very bad images because it was a long way away and it was very windy, of 2 hooded grebes. A bird that I wanted to see for a very long time. And I think I worked out that I walked about 75 kilometers over the course of 3 days, including a lot of vertical gain to see those birds, but worth every second for a bird that is sadly critically endangered. And it is one of those kind of last chance to see sort of birds because they are rapidly diminishing the population. On to Bolivia. Bolivia is an interesting country because a lot of people don't really think much of Bolivia when they think of birding in South America, but actually Bolivia is the 6th most bird diverse country in the world. There's about 1,400 bird species in Bolivia, and it is the most bird diverse landlocked country on Earth. Bolivia has no access to the sea, but it has a lot of bird species. Nice. So, Bolivia. One of the things that's interesting about Bolivia is that Bolivia is actually the country with the most macaw species in the world. Not a lot of people think of macaws when they think of Bolivia, but Bolivia has 12 species of macaws, including 2 critically endangered endemic macaws only found in Bolivia, the red-fronted and blue-throated macaws. So Both of these were digiscoped images with the Kowa scope in central Bolivia and the area around Trinidad. Really spectacular birds. But one species that I was particularly keen to see a few members of in Bolivia was flamingos. Bolivia swam to 3 different flamingo species, James's, Andean, and Chilean. Chilean's fairly widespread. The other 2, I had seen them at a distance in northern Argentina, but Bolivia, you can see all 3 of them together in the same place, and that area is here. Now, if you're looking at this without sort of much context to Bolivia, you might think that given that this is in the Andes, that these are snow-capped mountains, right? Actually, no, this is the Uyuni Salt Flats, the world's largest salt pan, over 10,500 square kilometers of pure salt, so big that, as you see, it can be seen from space. It's kind of a remarkable place to visit, and a sort of standard 3-day backpacker-style tour really is the only way to get into these kind of remote areas to see the birds. So you visit the salt pans one day, and then down through this area of kind of colourful lakes and strange thermal pools and stuff like that. And it's one of the most surreal places in the world in terms of landscape. So for a few months a year when the rains fall, this place essentially turns into the world's biggest mirror. So you get the full reflection of the sky, as you can see there with the clouds. The sky just kind of melts in. It's a very surreal, strange place to visit. And these incredible high-altitude lakes, snow-capped mountains, and flamingos. And I was fortunate enough to be able to get some pretty good digiscoping images of James's flamingo, one of the most endangered species of flamingos in South America. This is kind of a slow-motion video of 2 individuals, which I was able to take up there. They're not the most elegant species when they're sitting down. Really. Yeah, come out with one. Yeah, really spectacular bird. So, on to Brazil. Now, Brazil, it's kind of redundant for me to say that Brazil is big, but Brazil is really, really big. And you really get a sense of how big Brazil is when you travel sort of the length of it by bus. Because you can fly between the major cities in Brazil and you kind of lose the ground below you, right? You fly an hour to one place and you don't really realize how big a place is. I traveled into Brazil from Bolivia into Mato Grosso do Sul in the Pantanal and followed it all the way up to Fortaleza in Ceará in the northeast. I think I spent about 120 hours on buses to do that route, 7,000 kilometers worth of bus travel. Brazil's a difficult place to try and see every bird as an independent backpacker. Bolivia, Ecuador, it's a little bit easier to move around between random towns. Brazil, you can connect the big towns to big cities, but the small remote areas are a little bit harder to access by bus. Brazil, again, I don't really need to say that Brazil has some of the most beautiful birds in the world, whether it's the tanagers, the manakins, the hummingbirds. These are all digiscoped images with the Kowa scope. Our Aripe manakin, I could talk for half an hour just about that. One of the most critically endangered, range-restricted endemic manakins, found only on one plateau, 50 kilometers long and 1 kilometer wide. And funnily enough, the best place to see that bird is a water park, an active water park. So you're watching one of the rarest birds in South America while little kids run past you with rubber rings on and people go down slides. It's a really strange, sort of surreal experience. But funnily enough, and here's some other digiscope birds from the Pantanal. The Toco toucan needs no introduction, one of South America's, the world's most iconic birds. And the hyacinth macaw is another one that doesn't really need explaining. Absolutely beautiful birds. I love seeing this kind of bony tongue that they have to extract the nuts inside. Yeah. But actually, a lot of people were surprised when I said in Brazil that the bird that I was most keen to see wasn't a tanager, wasn't a hummingbird, wasn't a toucan. It was a duck. A lot of people think of South American birding, they don't really think of ducks. Waterfowl, water birds are not kind of the star birds of the South American continent when it comes to birders' kind of lists of species. The bird I wanted to see, however, is not just any duck. It's one of the 5 most critically endangered water birds on Earth, the Brazilian merganser. There are fewer than 250 individuals still left, and they inhabit these kind of raised cerrado ecosystem plateaus in the central area, mostly of Minas Gerais state. So this is kind of cerrado ecosystem. It's kind of dry savanna-like grassland, and in order to see this bird, I had to connect with a local birder because this is a bird that's very difficult to get to by public transport or to visit independently. So I made friends with this photographer, Alessandro Ardala. I speak Spanish, he doesn't speak Spanish. He speaks Portuguese, I don't speak Portuguese. So we communicated in what is known as Portuñol. Portuñol is kind of like a weird hybrid of Spanish and Portuguese with lots of gesturing and pointing. And birds are kind of a universal language. So I was able to point at pictures in the field guide and And he also had a custom of stopping every 2 hours for a cup of tea and a piece of cake, which meant that we got on famously right away. A very nice guy. And the Brazilian merganser inhabits these fast-flowing, clear, crystalline rivers in the plateaus around Minas Gerais. state. And as these rivers are clouding up through kind of soy farming and different invasive agricultural practices, these birds are finding less and less habitat and fewer places to fish. And this is a difficult bird. There aren't many of them left. But this river was known as a stretch where, some individuals lived and fished. We sat for 4 or 5 hours, not a bad place to sit for 4 or 5 hours, but we sat and waited and nothing. And gradually the few tourists that were coming came and they went, nothing. It got to almost the end of the day, and this spectacular male Brazilian merganser just swam down the river and proceeded to sit in front of us for 2 hours fishing and preening. And I was able to get some really great digiscoping footage of one of my most wanted birds in South America. I mean, this is a really, really critically endangered species. Again, its habitat is rapidly diminishing, and it's a bird that, again, sadly, a common thread of this talk is a lot of these birds are kind of the last chance to see. A lot of these birds are really critically endangered. But yeah, this was a very special encounter. And of course, the obligatory happy selfie. Cover that. Right. And now we're going to move on to Peru. So again, Peru, I could say this for every single country. It doesn't really need repeating. Peru is exceptionally biodiverse and exceptionally birdy, second only to Colombia in bird diversity. And actually, Peru has more resident species of birds than Colombia. There's about almost 1,900 species found in Peru. And along with the incredible cultural heritage that Peru has, the gastronomy, it's one of my favorite countries to travel in the world. Peru is full of unbelievably great bird species and lots of different ecosystems, whether it's the Inca terns, the most beautiful tern in the world, which are abundant in the area around Lima, endemic restricted species like the Junin grebe in the central route, or slightly more common widespread birds like this purple-collared woodstart. The area of Peru that I want to talk about is not just one bird, it's kind of a birding route, and for my money, one of the best birding routes on the entire continent, which is not what's known as the northern route, starting or ending in Cajamarca and Tarapoto, with a little extension down to the town of Plataforma. This route is home to some of South America's rarest, most range-restricted endemic birds, and also lots of birds that were only discovered in the last 30 or 40 years. Those areas are very inaccessible, and only recently some of the species there have even been found. This is a kind of example of what some of the forest looks like in the high section of the road. This was a part where I connected with 2 young backpacker birders who were doing the same thing as me, and we spent about 3 weeks kind of hitchhiking our way along this road and birding. So what we would do is we'd walk down the road in the morning birding. When we got to the hot part of the day and wanted to go back, we'd wait for a truck to come by, hitchhike, jump on the back, go back up to where we were staying, and then carry on to the next spot. It worked pretty well, and the good thing about being in a flatbed truck is that if there's a mixed flock by, you can bang on the side of the truck, jump out, and carry on birding. This ride was the most interesting hitchhike ride I had in the entire year in South America, which was, you can't really tell from the photo that vehicle is actually a hearse. The guy who picked us up liked to turn around as he was driving and joke that, you're the first living people I've had in the back of my car. He made that joke about 6 times over the course of the ride. And the way he drove, we were a bit concerned he was trying to create new business for himself by just ploughing off a mountain. But we got there. This route is full of, like I said, some really special species, really range restricted. Pale-billed antpitter is a good example. This is, for me, one of the 2 or 3 best looking antpitters in South America, very range restricted. This is just a video on my phone of one. You can't really hear it through the mic, but it's calling there. What else have you got? We've got marvelous spatuletail. I mean, marvelous spatuletail is, for me, undoubtedly the best hummingbird in the world. That is a truly special species, and it's only found really at a reserve right on the edge of Gokta waterfall, which is also one of Peru's most beautiful waterfalls. Long-whiskered owlet. Again, you could do a whole presentation just about long-whiskered owlet. It was only discovered in a mist net in 1977 and never seen in the wild again until the year 2000. It lives in extremely remote places. Its scientific name, Xenoglaux, literally translates as strange owl. It is a bit of a taxonomic mystery. Nobody really knows kind of how to put it in the family tree of owls, and I was fortunate enough to observe this bird 2 times, 2 separate nights, a very special encounter. And then you also have the town of Plataforma. We ended the northern Peru route in the town of Plataforma. Plataforma is a bit of a 1-horse town, or in this case, a six goose town in a random part of the kind of coffee-growing foothill forest sort of south of Tarapoto. And really, there'd be no reason, with respect to the residents of Plataforma, to visit Plataforma if it wasn't for a couple of very, very special birds. This is the one hotel in the town, and they have a peccary that thinks it's a dog and hangs around the house eating food and sleeping in a pile of sawdust. But the reason you go to Plataforma is, the clue is in the name of this hostel, Hospedaje Capito. Capito refers to this bird, the scarlet-banded barbet. The scarlet-banded barbet was discovered in 1996 and wasn't found reliably at any site until the mid-2010s, something like that, around Plataforma, and Cordillera Azulante, which was only discovered by a visiting birder in 2016. so to incredibly new for science, range-restricted endemic birds found in the forests around this one town. Fortunate enough to be able to observe both of them on this trip. And now we come to Colombia. So by this point, it's late November. I've been traveling for the best part of 11, 12 months, coming towards the end of the year, and I'm back to Colombia. Colombia is the country I've called home for the last 12 years or so. I've birded a lot in Colombia, seen a lot of species there, and I was kind of ready for a slightly relaxed little trip in Colombia. Some friends flew down to do a little birding trip with me, and we were going to do the central Western Andes route. Lots of new birds for them, nothing new for me, a gentle trip. One of my friends here, Steve, who's an English twitcher from way back, who's lived in Chicago for a long time, who likes the numbers and the targets and the challenges, started teasing me saying, well, what's your ranking in South America? How many birds have you seen? You've been traveling enough. I sort of thought, I don't really know. I looked at eBird and I realized I was second in South America, behind actually one of the two backpackers from the hitchhiking photo. And I was on about 1,900 species, something like that. And I sort of, it lit a little slight competitive spark in me, and I thought, it would be quite fun to be number one in South America for the year and to get 2,000 species. Not many people have done that. Let's see what we can do. So I kind of got this fantastic experience of having 11 months birding at a frantic pace, but at my own pace, going where I wanted. And then 1 month, like a big month in Colombia, a country I love traveling where I've seen a lot of birds. And it was like, okay, can I get this number in the time I've got? Funnily enough, the bird that nearly cost me that 2,000 birds target ended up being the best bird I saw all year, maybe one of the best birds I've ever seen in my life, because I was coming to the point where I had a little plan worked out. I was going to go to Bogota, get some Eastern Andean birds, head up to the Santa Martas, get some of the endemics up there, and finish, the 2,000 bird target in style. And then I got a phone call from a friend, a guide in a small lowland Pacific town called San Cipriano, and he said, what he said to me at the time was, the bird is still here. And what he was referring to was a bird called the banded ground cuckoo. Now, anyone who knows birding in the neotropics knows that the neomorphous ground cuckoos are these mythical ghosts of the forest that are exceptionally hard to see. And when you get the chance to go and see one, if there's a possibility of going, you take that chance. This bird had been attending an army ant swarm at this little jungle town called San Cipriano, which is kind of an interesting place because you get there on these amazing kind of motorbike platform contraptions and a train line through the jungle. And the reason it was there was this incredible phenomenon, an ant swarm. Ant swarms are this incredible thing where thousands, millions of army ants kind of raid through the jungle, chasing up cockroaches, snakes, invertebrates of all different types, even small mice and rats and things like that. And all these other birds kind of come, and it's like a buffet. So all of the things that the ants are chasing, these other birds come and they feed on. The ant birds are not called ant birds because they eat ants, they're called ant birds because they associate with army ants. And the bird in question, the banded ground cuckoo, as I say, this bird, one of the best birds I've ever seen in my life, in my opinion, my favourite bird that I've seen in 2024. I knew I had to go and see that bird, even if it cost 2,000 birds. There was never a big year goal involved. One bird means far more than a random number with birds I've seen a million times before. But I was fortunate in that I saw the ground cuckoo, and I was still able on the 30th of December with Santa Marta parakeet to just get past, just sneak past that 2,000 species mark. And I have to confess that on the 31st of December, I lay in a hammock all day and drank some beers and had a good rest for the first time in 364 days. So, that's kind of the story. I want to thank Kowa for having me, and particularly for providing me with the TSN-66 scope, which I did all of that digiscoping image was done with that scope, and a lightweight tripod. It's a great scope because it doesn't really weigh anything. It's extremely lightweight. I'm able to chuck it in the back of my bag, move around. I could hike those 70 kilometers up to the plateau for the hooded grebe with that thing on my back and not really feel it, which was fantastic. I'm also at a stand with birding experience on Nightingale M31 if anyone has any other questions or is interested in doing any of these trips without hitchhiking and sleeping in slightly more comfort than what I did. So again, thank you, Kowa, so much for having me, and appreciate it. And if there's any questions, I'll hang around here afterwards and we can chat. Thank you.